Sports Talk on DWS. It's Scott Beatty here with Marcus Jackson. Mike Pearson is with us. He's a former U of I sports information director. Most recent stint for him was 1989 to 1996. You may recognize him as well from articles in the News Gazette. He's in his 22nd year of writing Illini Legends, Lists, and Lore. The third edition of that book is coming out soon with more than 1,000 photos. A new 472-page edition will chronicle the history of U of I athletics since its inception in 1883. Mike joins us from his home in Ohio. Hello, Mike. How are you?
Scott and Marcus, I'm great. How are you?
Doing well. Glad to have you here. I bet this might be, I'm just going to guess here, that this might be a week where you may be glad not to be a sports information director.
Well, we had our share of things led by the NCAA probation and the Deion Thomas era. But you know what? Tackling the chief issue would not be one of my favorite things to do, that's for sure.
Well, it's a tough water to wade, but I'm sure you navigated well your own fair share of controversial issues that came up. But hey, on a more sorrowful note, Judd Heathcote, the famed Michigan State basketball coach, passed away this week. We learned of that. I know you had a relationship with him with your background at Michigan State.
Yeah, I'm a Michigan State grad. I returned to MSU from 80 to 87 and was Judd's basketball SID during that span, during the Scott Skiles years. In fact, Judd and I had a regular noon hour meeting on the paddleball courts in the bowels of Jennison Fieldhouse. He and I would take on Tom Izzo and one of the Boylan boys, honestly, we normally came out on top because of Judd.
Well, what do you remember about him?
He was as fair a person as I've ever met. He had a very gruff exterior, but inside there was a heart of gold. If you were loyal to him, he was loyal to you. He respected hard work. He respected energy. And if you gave that to him, you were a lifelong friend. And, people don't understand. They may see the jokester, and he was as good a joke teller as anyone, but he had a heart of gold as well.
We're talking with Mike Pearson, former U of I Sports Information Director, SID, as it's known, has a new book coming out on Illinois sports.
Mike, sticking with Coach Heathcote, I had the pleasure of speaking with him over the phone a few years back. He was out in Spokane at home, and a lot of people have mentioned this week how funny he was, and it's kind of rare when you think about those old school basketball coaches, those tough guys who were so successful being really funny, but he was one of those guys who was able to be both. He was tough on you on the court, but he could also, like you said, tell a really good joke.
So he, in his very first press conference at Michigan State, I distinctly remember him saying, "I come from Montana where men are men and women are too." And that was just the tip of the iceberg for Judd Heathcote. I remember going to Bloomington, Indiana, and we faced a great Steve Alford team, and the Spartans had a lead in the first half, a big lead, and Alford went on to promptly hit 5 or 6 threes in a row. And after the game, a reporter asked Judd, he said, "Judd, did you think about changing anything in that first half when Alford was going off?" And he said, "Yeah, I've thought about changing my pants." He was as quick a wit as anybody, and that's why reporters loved him.
Well, tell us about this new book you have coming out, the third edition of Illini Legends, Lists, and Lore. I assume the impetus behind it is the second edition is missing quite a bit of history at this point, which is the second edition is outstanding, and not just because our very own Brian Barnhart narrates part of it with the audio CD that accompanied its second edition, and Ed Bond contributed a lot of this as well. But yeah, what got you going here on the third edition?
Well, it was the sesquicentennial that got it going. Kent Brown called. Kent was on my staff when I was there in the 80s and 90s, and he said, I'm not sure if you're up for it, but we need to update the book. It's the 150th anniversary of the university, and they want us to do an athletics-related piece. I said, let's do it. And so we began to go over the old stuff and churn out the new stuff. We added 15 new chapters, a lot of new stuff. It's not a regurgitation by any means. I redid virtually everything. But starting in the 74-75 season, when women's athletics came into being, reached the varsity level, I decided, you know what, I didn't do a very good job of telling the women's history in versions 1 and 2, and I'm not going to let that happen this time around. So for every chapter starting from 74-75 on, there are 2 pages per year devoted to women's athletics. And so that added another 30 pages or so, and we've added. There's a big 16-page color section of Mark Jones and some of his favorite photos that he's taken since we hired him back in the late 80s, and the names of every letter winner are in the book, and every major award winner. So I think this is the kind of book, hopefully, that people can put on their nightstand. And it's not War and Peace, where you have to read the first paragraph to understand the plot. You can open this book up to any page, read it for 15, 20 minutes, put it down, pick it up the next night, and go to a different page and learn something else. So I tried to write it in USA Today style, no story more than 300 words, and at least a lot of compliments have come because of that.
When you say we, who gets involved in all this?
Well, this time the University of Illinois Press is the publisher. They're in town, and so they made several suggestions, and I sat down with Kent, and I sat down with several members of the athletic staff and said, you guys have lived this for the last 15 years since I've been gone. I know what happened, but you have to tell me what we need to include in the book. And so, as you can imagine, the hardest part is not only deciding what to put into the book, but what to leave out. There's only so many pages that we could include, and so that is my biggest consternation is leaving a lot of great stories out, and there are a lot of them.
Mike, Illinois fans certainly are lucky to have something like this with you and the people working with you putting all this together. Do you know if any other Big Ten schools have anything like this, or they've got books with all this kind of history like you guys have put together?
Well, as a matter of fact, mine was the template for several in the Big Ten. Indiana followed with an Illini or a Hoosier version. Michigan followed with one. When I left the University of Illinois in 1996, I became the acquisitions director at Sports Publishing, a local publishing house in Champaign, and so it was my job to come up with future titles, and since the Illini book had been a success, we decided to replicate it throughout the country. Notre Dame, Arizona State, any number of other schools, Stanford, did the very same treatment of their history. And so, I'm pleased to say that several other books followed in Illini Legends, Listen Laura footsteps.
And how do you handle, if at all, the new Hall of Fame in this book? Because it's obviously going to be adding members every year, and the book's release is right at the time with the first class.
Well, the first class is included in the book. I'm pleased to say there is I think it's a 6 to 8 page section devoted to the charter class, and so there's a special picture and a description of all of them. Of course, when if I do the 4th division, I'm going to ask. It'll probably be 2025. I'll ask Lauren Tate's help at that point. To update it, it'll be there'll be a lot more Illini history and a lot of Hall of Famers to follow.
That's good. That's great stuff. It's a great piece of history and chronicling of the Illini that you're leaving for fans, I think, for several years to come. And I can tell it's a labor of love.
Well, it really is. And as you have already mentioned, I do this every week. I come up with something else. I have. When I first began the second time around back in '89, I decided to put together a chronology book. It's basically 365 blank notebook sheets, and I decided, okay, let's start January 1 through December 31, and when I see a birthday, I'm going to plug it in. When I see a special event, I'm going to plug it in, and now day of the year, I think I have 2 or 3 sheets for each year, for each day rather. So I've got, you see me list one birthday on Sunday. I've got probably 15 others I could have mentioned on that day, but space doesn't allow for that.
Yeah, space doesn't allow for much more here either, Mike, but we do appreciate your time. You can find Mike at his website, sportsLLL.com. Follow him on Twitter at Illini Legends or at B1G for big, B1GLLL. Congratulations, Mike, on the new release of Illini Legends lists and lore. Comes out very soon, right?
It does. In fact, they're hopefully going to take delivery of it late this week, and hopefully it'll be in bookstores shortly after that. And I'll be back in town signing books during the Nebraska weekend, and I'll be at any number of spots signing books. So perhaps we can revisit it at that point.
Yeah, stop by, would you? Thanks a lot, Mike.
Okay, thanks, guys. Nice talking to you.
All right, Mike Pearson, former SID at the U of I.